Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our Diamond Trends webinar that we hold on a quarterly basis. My name is Avi Krawitz. I'm the Senior Analyst at Rapaport, and I really appreciate you giving your time today to discuss and deal and hopefully understand a bit better what's going on in the diamond market. It's a complicated market out there, and unlike one that I've seen in my relatively short or long time in the industry. I'm now 14 years at Rapaport and 14 years in the industry, and it's quite a unique market. So we're going to be looking at the title of this webinar is a sustainable recovery, or is it a sustainable recovery with a question mark at the end? And just in terms of a spoiler, just a spoiler alert. I actually think that it is a sustainable recovery. I think that the market is in a good place, and well prepared to deal with the challenges that lie ahead. But there are certainly challenges that we have ahead. Before we start, and we're going to deal with India during this webinar, but I would like to just take a moment to reach out and say how we're thinking about our friends and our colleagues in India. The COVID situation there is not easy, as we all know, and it affects the market, but it affects people's lives and their health as well. So we're praying for everyone's good health, and that everyone should stay safe. So and we'll look at how India, the COVID situation is affecting the markets in this webinar. But let's look at some of the goals that we have for today. Firstly, we want to look at, when we talk about a recovery, we want to assess the recovery in the context of demand factors that are taking shape, as well as the dynamics on the supply side of the market that's really having an impact on today's the environments in today's market. And then what happens next? How do we ensure that there is a right balance between supply and demand moving forward? Will there be that right balance between supply and demand? We'll be looking at the second half of the prospects for the second half of this year. And then I'm going to spend some time just looking at some trends that are defining the markets, that I think are defining the markets beyond that supply-demand dynamic in the short term and also in the long term as we come out of this COVID situation. So let's start with our traditional graphs. Actually, I'm going to start with the next graph first. And that's looking at the RapNet Diamond Index. What are prices doing at the moment? And we're seeing quite a consistent uptrend, particularly if you look at that black line, which is our flagship 1 characters. We're seeing a fairly sustainable and consistent rise in the index. And the index, as we know, is an average of the top 10% of goods on RapNet, and looking at those D2H IFVS goods, the average of the averages. And so we're seeing a consistent uptrend in the market, and at least in the last few months in the other sizes as well, that we're seeing some stability, at least in the half carat is in the orange line, and some uptrend also in the 3 carat, and similarly some stability in the 30 pointers. Looking at on a quarterly basis, the 1 characters have now had 4 quarters in a row where we've had an increase in the RAPI index, and that's something we haven't seen for quite some time. And so the question then is it better demand that's pushing prices up, or is it a scarcity of supply that's influencing this sort of positive trend in polished prices that we've seen? Or is it a bit of both? Is it coming both from the supply and the demand side as the market finds its equilibrium so to speak, coming out of that unusual 2020 situation. So let's look at the demand, what's happening on the demand side, and certainly, at the retail, we're getting some positive news. It's been quite refreshing actually to write to cover the news in the diamond industry lately, because there's a lot of positivity in terms of jewelry sales, and particularly in the US, we're seeing some sort of a momentum gathering. MasterCard, which tracks data through its systems, and also among retailers that are not selling via MasterCard, but they're seeing jewelry sales up by 255% in April and March, 106%. And granted that was comparing to last year's very low numbers when retail shut down in March, April in the United States because of COVID. But even, I would suspect that even compared to 2019, although MasterCard doesn't say so, I would suspect that the numbers are at least in line with that, if not a bit higher, for March and April. We certainly saw in January and February, which was pre-COVID last year, that the numbers are higher, that's the sort of growth that we would expect at retail. It's around 3% year on year. And we're seeing that sort of growth among the major jewelry companies, and that's across geographic markets. Signet, which I guess is I would say is the bellwether for the United States, in the first quarter is expecting 86% growth over last year for the first quarter, but it's also 7% higher than 2019. So that's quite encouraging. LVMH, which is a global luxury brand, has 35% and 1% over last year, and that's excluding Tiffany, which that's organic growth. When you take Tiffany into account now, obviously LVMH's numbers are going to be inflated. But also in India, Titan Company, this is pre-second wave of the coronavirus in India. Titan saw very good numbers for the January through March period, showing 53% growth over 2 years ago as well. And similarly in Hong Kong, China, Chow Tai Fook, Luke Fook are showing pretty strong growth from last year at the very least. And Chow Tai Fook in mainland China is 140% growth. In Hong Kong and Macau, they're seeing 35% growth. And particularly in mainland China, we're seeing also that similar sort of momentum that retail sales are recovering. And even in Hong Kong as well, there's some improvement after many years of difficulty, even before coronavirus in Hong Kong. So Signet Jewelers is, as we see it, was their strongest first quarter since, well, at least in about 4 years that they gave a provisional report for, and I think it's worth mentioning that Signet has really we can and we should do a report on Signet, because they really have turned things around quite impressively, both in terms of their, through their path to brilliance strategy that they undertook to really invest in innovation, in digital, and we're seeing the fruits of that strategy in their revenue and their profits, that they and the way they bounce back from the pandemic, and also if you're watching the stock market, their share price was down to about $6 this time last year, and it's trading at around 60 now. So it's a good recovery story, and we need to pay close attention, or other retailers should pay close attention to what Signet is doing. particularly as it now moves into a new phase of its innovation sort of strategy, a new 3-year program, so to speak. So does retail sales translate to the wholesale market, to the dealer market? We're seeing that the US numbers, the US imports of polished diamonds has steadily increased. We're not quite back to pre-COVID levels yet. In terms of the first quarter is usually a fairly strong quarter for orders in the market. But we are seeing a steady increase, and at least that first quarter number is resembles some normalcy, let's say, of goods imported to the United States. This is net polished imports, which is the excess of exports over imports, and it's for above half carats only. We're struggling a bit with the data coming out of the US for the small goods, for goods below half carat, because their exports are higher than their imports, and that shouldn't be the case for the United States. The United States is a net importer of goods. It's a consumer market, and so they should be bringing in more goods, and so it's a discussion that we have to have with the Census Bureau who compiles this data. But we are seeing, and certainly anecdotally, when we speak to dealers in the market, when we speak to suppliers, the focus is really on the United States, and people saying that there is a steady demand coming out of the United States. We see it on RapNet as well. This graph, which appeared in the Rapaport research report, which we published last week, shows that diamonds off RapNet that in March, which implies a sale. Diamonds go off RapNet for many reasons, but mostly it's an indication that there is a sale. We consider 2 months prior because as the latest data, because that gives us time to see if that diamond came back onto RapNet or not. If it didn't come back on, it's assumed to be a sale, and we assume that with fair amount of confidence. And we see that in every category of the 1 caraters, there was quite strong growth compared to the average of the previous 3 months. Certainly in the higher color goods, D2H, across the board, we saw high double-digit percentage growth. And in the lower colors, there was a bit of a lower percentage growth, but still noteworthy. And so that's all an indication that at least in the first quarter through to March, there was an uptick in activity. The retail market performed well, and that translated to some extent to the wholesale and dealer market, that we saw good orders in the first 3 months of the year. So what then happened? And I'm talking about the first quarter initially, and we'll deal with April, May soon, because things did change in April and May because of the situation in India. But I think it only changed on the supply side. So let's first deal with the first quarter on the supply side of things. What happened in the rough market during the first 3 months of the year? And so we see that in India manufactures over 90% of diamonds that enter the market. So it's 90% of polished out there is manufactured through India, and so they're the main importer of rough diamonds that goes through the system. And so we saw in the fourth quarter already of last year, there was quite a big spike in imports of rough diamonds to India, and that continued through the first quarter. We reported quite extensively on diamonds.net that the rough market was strong. during January, February, March, and we expected that as well. The first quarter is usually a period after the holiday season where there's inventory replacement, and so manufacturers are really looking and understanding what their clients need and ramping up that manufacturing, especially since there was such a lull last year. As you can see in the second quarter of 2020, and to some extent in the third quarter as well, the rough markets froze. Both the mining companies reduced their sales, and we've got to give credit to them for doing so willingly, and manufacturers stopped buying rough because of the situation in the market, and so there was this pent-up demand for rough that was released in the fourth quarter, and that momentum continued into the first quarter of 2021, and we see that in the reflected in the sales of the mining companies. This is a combination of De Beers and Alrosa sales. The bar graph in blue represents the volume of sales, and the orange line represents the value of those sales. And in terms of volume, the first quarter was the highest that we've seen in many, at least in 5 or 6 years. And I'm sure looking further back that it would be more than that. That is probably a peak period. And it's not the case in terms of value. That sort of indicates that there was a lot of small goods, lower value, smaller goods that were sold in the rough market. But in terms of overall volume, there was a lot of rough sold. And actually, in my last webinar that I gave in January, we looked at the fourth quarter, the spike in rough demand in the fourth quarter, and we kind of, I gave I expressed some concern that if we have another quarter of very high rough sales, then we should maybe start worrying about getting into that situation where there would be an oversupply of polished again. I think that under normal circumstances, that question would still arise, and to some extent it still does. But again, the situation in India changes the thought process a little bit, and we'll still get into that a bit more. The mining companies, the graph I like to show, the mining companies reduced their inventory, and that was a big thing because I was keeping an eye on those inflated rough inventory that the mining companies were holding in the second and third quarter as the rough market froze. So mining companies continued to produce. So they built up their inventory because they weren't selling. So if you consider that inventory is production minus sales by volume, everything in carats, then we see from this graph that in that fourth quarter of last year and first quarter of this year, they sold off a lot of that inventory, and certainly the indication that we're getting from Alrosa and De Beers, at least, where the main concerns were, is that their inventory is now back at sort of normalized levels. And so once the rough is sold, it gets manufactured, and we have seen in terms of India then selling on its polished, that there has been a steady rise and steady sort of recovery in terms of polished exports coming out of India. And this graph looks very much like the US import graph, where we saw the drop, the steady decline in 2019 actually, and then that sharp drop in the second quarter and the steady increase. So so that indicates that through at least the last 6 months, there has been a steady flow of goods, of diamonds to the market, and that's resulted in a that's resulted in a healthy market. I think that we've seen in those first 3 months of the year some sort of sense of normalcy return to the industry. Then, of course, towards the end of March, India saw a dramatic rise in COVID cases, and the government implemented restrictions. The diamond industry was allowed to carry on operating. It was sort of deemed some sort of essential business, and but nevertheless, the manufacturer there were restrictions on operations, and we're still seeing those restrictions in place today. Manufacturers reduced their capacity either because of social distancing concerns. There was a high level. There is still a high level of absenteeism. Excuse me. Workers not being at work because of health concerns, because they might be quarantined, because of a family member being infected. And so we estimate that manufacturing declined by about 30 to 40%. Obviously, it varies from factory to factory. It may vary from 5% to 50%, really, but on average, we're expecting that in April, May, manufacturing levels have dropped by about 30 to 40%. Also, the GIA, because of that high volume of goods that were sent to the GIA because of the big rough purchasing that took place and the increase in polished output, and then also because of the restrictions implemented that because of COVID in India, the GIA had a backlog, has a backlog of over a month. I'm hearing that it's even increased in the last week or two to up to 40, 45 days in some cases, and that's at the Mumbai and Surat factories. And so that's created a bottleneck of supply of goods that are either rough, that's waiting to be manufactured, or polished, that is waiting to be graded. And so at some point, there's that bottleneck, and at some point it's going to be released. And so we see that the goods that are available to the market at the moment has decreased in April already. And this is a graph. This is a graph that shows new diamonds that are listed on RapNet, and you can see that steady increase over various months. February was a bit of a dip, but in March there was a spike of new goods on RapNet. The blue graph, and then in April we've seen a decline again of new goods. We can't show you May, obviously, because we're in the middle of May and we need a full month to make a fair comparison. The blue graph is all new certificates or new graded diamonds on RapNet, whereas the orange is for RapSpec A3 and better goods. It's a higher quality of goods that we base our indices on. In the meantime, the rough market continues to be fairly strong, and that surprised me a little bit, because I thought since manufacturers are restricted that they would cut back on their rough buying, but that hasn't been the case. And we see in April that the market continued to be fairly strong, and our understanding is that manufacturers are worried about shortages, and so they're still in the rough market to make sure that they have the goods when as they can ramp up production again. This is Alrosa sales. We see that they had a spike again in April, which they actually reported about today. So this is sort of fresh off the press. Okay, so what happens in what will happen then in the second half of the year? And we considered that question in our research report that we published last week, and certainly supply is going to be a primary concern for the market. I think that supply volatility and what happens with all that backlog of goods or shortage of goods will be the defining thing for the market. But there are also other aspects of the market dynamic that I think we need to hone in on and be aware of, that is really going to shape the industry, is shaping the industry conversation at the moment. So we identified 5 developments that are shaping the diamond market, and I'm going to briefly run through them with you. So, before I do that, we will have time for questions at the end. So, so feel free to write a question in the Q&A section of the Zoom application. I forgot to mention that earlier, and I'll try to address your questions. So, what are the 5 aspects of the market? So the first, as I mentioned, is supply volatility. I think we can expect that, and much of that depends on the situation in India. When the COVID situation improves, and how quickly or to what extent goods are released to the market. If India's COVID situation improves towards the end of May, as many expect, and we are, thank God, seeing an improvement in daily cases, albeit that they are still very high. We are seeing an improvement in the last few days. But if by the end of May the situation improves, we can expect that there will be an influx of goods to the market in, say, June or July, as the GIA reduces its turnaround time. So the GIA should deplete its backlog fairly quickly, because there are fewer goods being submitted now, as far as I understand, or that will be submitted as manufacturing has slowed down. And so we can expect that the GIA should be able to get through its backlog at some point when operations return to sort of normal. And then the second scenario that we need to consider, and these are, I wouldn't say they're predictions, but I think it's just worth being aware of these possible scenarios, is that shortages may appear around September as demand improves for the holiday season, and given that the goods that are being that manufacturing is lower now, that actually this is a period of time after high rough buying in the first quarter. You would expect manufacturing to ramp up now, so that the goods get to market in the third quarter as jewelers start to prepare for the holiday season. But it seems to me that we can expect some shortages later in the year. And so the question then is, how does that affect pricing? How does that supply-demand dynamic affect pricing? This is a graph that I thought was just worth putting here. It's something that Martin has dealt with in his presentations in the past, just to be aware that what affects prices, how do prices decline, is when either supply goes up or demand comes down, or both. Often we've in 2019, and certainly even before that, I think we saw that an oversupply of goods caused the depression of polished prices. And we've always sort of bemoaned the fact that we're not seeing sufficient growth in demand to counter that. And so as supply increases and demand declines, or demand stagnates, we could expect prices to decline. On the flip side, as supply reduces and demand increases, or one of those factors stay the same, we can expect prices to be supported by that dynamic. And we're sort of seeing that at the moment, and we see that on RapNet, that that we've seen a drop in the number of stones on RapNet since April, and we've seen prices, our price indexes, and the RAPI index, which is the orange line, the blue line is the number of stones on RapNet. We see that prices have been supported or continue to increase as supply has dropped, and that's just a nice visual image that I think depicts that sort of supply-demand dynamic. Obviously, there's a lot more nuance involved. So that's just a little something to be aware of, I think, over the next 6 months in terms of the supply dynamic. The second issue that I'm keeping my eye on is the dynamic in the rough market. That firstly, if the situation in India does go on for a prolonged period, perhaps in the short term we would see a shift in sending rough to India to other manufacturing centers, particularly amongst those large Indian site holders who have factories in other locations such as Botswana or Namibia. That would be in the short term, and I wouldn't be surprised if because of the restrictions not only on manufacturing but also on customs, on shipping goods, delays in that process, that they might look for more efficient ways to get their goods to the market. But then also in the long term, we are seeing that De Beers, at least in its supply, we understand that they want to encourage more goods to be manufactured in beneficiation centers. Those are centers in Southern Africa, particularly, such as Botswana and Namibia, which want to add value to their mining revenue. And so our understanding is that De Beers is prioritizing rough above 2 carats to be manufactured in Botswana and Namibia, and maybe a little bit in South Africa, but that would affect the journey that the diamond takes, the diamond route, so to speak. That instead of a rough diamond traveling from Botswana to Dubai to India, and then the polished from India to Antwerp or Israel or to New York, or eventually getting to the US market, maybe we will see more goods being polished in Botswana and then sent directly to the US or China to that end consumer market. And so it's a dynamic that I think is changing over time, and it's something we need to keep an eye on. Is Gaborone going to become an important polished distribution center in addition to just sort of a rough hub that it has become in the last few years? The second trend that in the rough market that I'm keeping an eye on is the segmentation of the market, or the categorization of rough buyers. That there are different types of companies that buy rough. They're manufacturers whose job is to cut and polish a rough diamond into a beautiful polished diamond. There are dealers who buy rough and sell the rough on to the rest of the market and profit out of that. And then there are your retail manufacturers such as Tiffany, Signet, Chow Tai Fook, who buy rough in order to manufacture polish that they use for their in-house operations. And so De Beers at least has categorized those types of businesses and customizing its supply according to each one's needs. And our understanding is that the company wants to see more manufacturing going on and less dealing, in other words, less reselling of De Beers goods. And so the question then is, what happens to the rough dealer market? What happens to A, the rough dealer, and B, what happens to the small manufacturer who relies on that secondary rough market for supply, for rough supply? And so that's another sort of dynamic that's changing, and that I think we need to be aware of, just in terms of the greater market dynamic. And then the third thing in the rough restructuring issue is the question of lower production. That I think we are entering a period now of a new lower level, a new lower normal of rough production. And we saw that expected drop last year because of COVID, but there isn't a rush to spike back up to pre-COVID levels on the rough production side. And as far as I can see, the volume of carrots coming out of the ground this year will be slightly lower than last year. We should also take into account the inventory that's just been sold off from that was left over from last year. But nevertheless, I don't think that we can expect a massive increase next year, and particularly when we consider that the Argyle mine has closed down, and so there's less rough coming out of the ground, and so the question then is, are there holes to fill? You know, is there a shortage of rough? Is there enough rough coming out of that's going to come out of the ground? Are there alternatives to supply that might fill that gap, such as the secondary market, the secondary polished market that we know has a sizable amount of diamonds available? Maybe there's an inventory of rough backed up somewhere that the market can tap. You know, maybe there's government sources that have rough that's going to be released to the market. We don't know. And then, of course, the obvious question is will lab grown demand and supply fill that gap and gain some market share? These are all questions that we don't have answers to at the moment. We only speculate about. The third issue that I'm looking at is digital innovation. The market's going to continue to innovate, and we've got to get on board. Digital is bringing everyone closer to the end consumer, and including the miners and including the manufacturers. When you consider that a manufacturer is able to put all its inventory online, has greater transparency about each stone, beautiful imaging for each stone, so that the retailer can tap into manufacturers' inventory and source goods much more easily without having to travel or without having to have dealers come to their office and upsell them. And the question then is, what does that mean for the dealer market? Martin has stressed this before, how important the dealer market is, how important the dealer is finding the right stone for the right person at the right time. And so is that, I think we need to ask ourselves what the role of the dealer is moving forward, and how do they fit into this dynamic. It's something that we want to see, a dynamic dealer market, but the internet might be undercutting them, and so we keep an eye on that. Larger companies are able to invest in digital, which positions them to gain market share, meaning that the smaller players may lose out, and I think that's true both at the wholesale level and manufacturing level, as well as the retail level. And then finally, consumers are returning to stores. There's a pent-up need to get out there and shop. I know I have it myself, that people want to go to the store again, especially as vaccinations roll out and more people feel safer to go out again. And jewelers, having figured out the e-commerce play, and really upped our game in terms of how to sell online last year, we need to figure out how to now mesh the two. We've got years of experience of selling in store. Now we have the last year of experience selling online. But now there's a new environment, and consumers want to see that interaction between e-commerce and and face-to-face selling, or let's say that not that they want it, but it's an effective way to sell. And we got to figure out a way to really elevate the jewelry buying experience, because we had we were at an advantage actually as a jewelry industry in 2020, because a lot of our competition was out of the market, particularly the travel industry, the experience industry. Everyone was stuck at home, and people still had money to spend, and they wanted to spend it on meaningful items such as jewelry. And so the industry benefited from that. But it's not going to last forever, and there is going to be a return to travel, and certainly leisure travel. I think it'll take a bit longer for business travel to come back, but people want to go, and people want to have new experiences again, and we will start to see the travel industry come back, and so people will be spending that discretionary money on travel and other items as well. We can't forget that electronics and cosmetics and all these industries are. Cosmetics is another example that people women weren't necessarily made up as much as they would have been, because they were stuck at home for the last year, and so now they're out again, and so you would expect spending on makeup and fashion to increase again. In terms of travel, and the question then arises: will the luxury tourist shopper return? And I actually think that the emphasis on local will stick around for a while. I think certainly in the US there is a desire to support your local business, but then also the question on China. And I think that the Chinese luxury shopper has gotten used to now shopping in their local markets. And also the Chinese government, we know, has been for a long time on a program to encourage local spending, and so I think we will see that that brands will continue to invest in their operations in mainland China, and it will take a while before that Chinese tourist shopper comes back to that Fifth Avenue store to spend in a very meaningful way. The third thing, so as a result of all that, we really need to, we can't take our position for granted. We need to invest in marketing. Really need to up our game in terms of our messaging. And if the three golden rules of the diamond industry were always connections, I really think that today we need to consider that it's content. It's all about content. And we have a habit as companies in the industry to say, it's the beer's role to create content. It's the Natural Diamond Council's, that's their job. They need to create content. But the truth is that you can't do that. And it's really, especially today when content is so accessible, especially for our industry. And when I talk about content, I talk about both traditional media in terms of television, print, etc., and social media engagement, and as well as face-to-face engagement. It's all about making your message appealing, and your engagement with your consumer on a personal level, and that's something that we can all do, whether it's a retailer selling to a consumer, or a supplier selling to a buyer, or even on the rough market. I would argue that that I think we're already seeing in the rough market that there's more innovation in terms of marketing and selling rough diamonds, which is kind of cool. Okay, so that's that, and then the fifth element of or characteristic of the market that we're really keeping an eye on for this year is the issue of sustainability. And, you know, every year when we look at our editorial coverage, there's always a theme. You know, synthetics obviously was a theme. Blockchain was a buzzword for a while. This year, and well, last year and carrying on into this year, and even getting more into this year, it's about sustainability, and particularly the environment. That what is the diamond market and what is the jewelry market doing to show and to not only show but to ensure that their product is sustainable, is environmentally friendly, does no harm, and does good. In fact, it's not about not doing harm, it's about doing good. This was a headline in Vogue 2 years ago already. Are mine diamonds more environmentally friendly? Not so fast, was the implication that there's a more environmentally friendly alternative. And so we see that this issue of sustainability and the jewelry industry, how the diamond and jewelry industry relates to or encompasses sustainability issues, is receiving mainstream attention. And so why is that? What happened over the last 2-3 years that motivated that? Two things happened, two things changed. The first thing is that society changed. Consumers care not only about their own well-being, they care also about the planet, and they aspire to reduce the negative impact of their shopping behavior on the environment. And so today's consumer is very different to yesterday's consumer, and these are issues that they're looking at. And especially over the last year, I think it really has gained more. We all, I think, have gained more sensitivity to environmental issues. I think the COVID thing was an environmental wake-up call for us all. It gave, you know, one of maybe an unintended positive of COVID was that it gave the planet a time to breathe. We didn't have airplanes in the sky, and we were all traveling less in our motor cars, etc. So I think we all became a bit more sensitive, and we are more conscious of these issues in our habits, in our shopping habits especially. The second thing that changed was that synthetics, no, it's not popular these days to call them synthetics, but I like the double S, and they are synthetics. Synthetic diamonds, lab-grown diamonds, became more widespread, gained broader appeal, both in terms of consumers being more aware of lab-grown diamonds, and also within the trade, that being in lab-grown diamonds, whether you're a retailer, a miner, a manufacturer, or a retailer, didn't have the same, it lost its taboo. And so it gained broader appeal. And so the central message of the central message of the lab-grown diamond market was a claim that, unlike natural diamonds, the product is conflict-free and does not harm the environment. And we've complained about that negative advertising for years, and sometimes we react to it, and sometimes we think it's better just to extol the virtues of our own product. I think that is the better tactic, but sometimes there's a direct attack on the natural diamond industry, and we saw that in the last week. Pandora, which is the industry's, well, it is among the biggest jewelers in the market, they made a big announcement that they unveiled a collection, a new line of lab-grown diamonds. And part of that announcement was that we are not using mined diamonds anymore, we being them. And so, and their messaging was, you know, I don't want to spend time saying they're wrong, and this is what the industry needs to do, but I think it's just worthwhile being aware of the messaging that they used, because firstly it was very effective. They got great coverage, and secondly, these are the issues that these are the points that are being made about the natural diamond industry, and so we need to take these points and learn from them, and show that they are not correct through our actions, as well as our words and our messaging and our marketing. So the first thing that they said was that our aim is to make diamond jewelry accessible to a wider audience. They said that they want to transform the market for diamond jewelry with affordable, sustainably created products. It's a symbol. Their lab grown is a symbol of innovation and progress, as they are of as much a symbol of innovation and progress as they are of enduring beauty. It's a testament to ongoing and ambitious sustainability agenda that Pandora has. And diamonds are not only forever, but they're for everyone. In other words, again, implying that natural diamonds are not for everyone. They're not accessible. They're not affordable. There's no innovation. They're not sustainable. Where the opposite is really true. We need to show that the opposite is true. They are accessible. You can buy a beautiful fashion diamond at an affordable price, and they're fun, and there's a lot that a woman can do, there's a lot that men can do with diamonds. The diamond industry, the natural diamond industry, is extremely innovative. And we see that because we're in the industry, but we don't showcase it. In terms of the innovation that's taking place across the pipeline, including dry subjects like innovation in mining. It's an extremely innovative industry, and we need to amplify that message. And then there's the sustainability question. And part of the release from Pandora was showing quite a long paragraph saying that all their products have received carbon neutral certification. And so that's the sort of messaging that we don't really see in the natural diamond industry. And so we need to think about our sustainability message. And what are we doing in terms of sustainability? And I actually think that the diamond industry has really upped its game. We see in the last number of years, particularly amongst the mining companies, as well as the retail companies such as Signet and Tiffany, but De Beers and Alrosa are really no one denies that mining is not the most environmentally friendly, but the contribution that they make to conservation, for example, I think does bring the industry into a net positive, and we need to show that. But so we all got to consider the 3 P's of sustainability. What how are we treating our people? Who is benefiting from the diamond industry? Is anyone being harmed by the diamond industry? But more on the positive. And then, of course, there's the environmental issue, and how does that fit into our profits? That a more sustainable diamond, we believe, will be able to give us better profit, because it will sell better, and people will be willing to pay more for those diamonds, and B, because there is a better demand for those as the world is evolving. So I'm sorry if I rushed you all and gave you a lot of data and information. We will be sending this presentation out, or this video out to you once it's ready from the Zoom recording. But I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you all for listening. And if you want to reach out to me outside of the webinar, these are my details. Okay, so let me take a sip of water. Cheers. And I'll take some questions. And feel free to ask any more. So So what do you expect will be the short and longer term impact of lab grown diamonds on the natural market? Look, I think that for the small goods, the lab grown market is taking some market share. It's actually a very interesting. I think years from now there will be a business school study done on this, because there are two schools of thought really, and in a way, well, there are two schools of thought. There's the De Beers school that is saying that it's a fashion product. We need that there's a fixed cost and therefore there's a fixed price, and they're selling it at that fixed price. And also in terms of grading, it doesn't really need a grade because it needs a quality mark, because it doesn't have that rarity that the 4Cs might empower it to or that the 4Cs warrant for it. That's the first school of thought. In a way, Pandora fits into that because they are low-cost jewelry. I don't know about their pricing. I mean, their pricing is, it's low cost, but they're not. I don't think they're setting their price according to the cost as De Beers is claiming to do. But it's low price and it's fashion jewelry. Pandora is not going to sell an engagement ring. The other side of the coin is that it's a branding exercise. That a lab-grown producer can brand a diamond and through the brand maintain value and or gain value, and therefore they can sell it as an engagement ring product. And that's where the concern lies for the natural diamond market. If the product gains traction in the engagement ring, our view is that as supply increases, value is going to decline. We feel that it's a retailer's responsibility, ethical responsibility, to make the customer aware of that diamond is not going to maintain value in the same way as a natural diamond is. And so I think there's going to be a bit of both those elements in the market. It's going to be fun to watch. And I think it'll take some time. I think the main question at the moment, though, is on those small goods, and I think there is some traction. I will say this about those diamond companies, manufacturers primarily, and also any company that's selling both products. It's really up to them to counter this Pandora sort of sentiment that I can almost forgive Pandora for taking that line that we're going the sustainability route. But what about those companies that are selling both? Signet is one that Signet Jewelers sells both. They need to. It's up to them to not only up to them, but they most empowered to explain to consumers, to explain to the customer that both are legitimate products, and that messaging of one being more ethical than the other is not true, certainly not true to the detriment of the natural diamond industry. And I think we need to think about that, especially if you're in both amongst both miners, manufacturers, and jewelers. Anyway, let's see. Would you like to comment on Pandora's announcement, how it relates to natural diamonds, trends going into the future, especially with Gen Zs? I think we've dealt with that. I will say that it's a Gen Z product at the moment. It's a low-cost product, and the number of, the points being made, the volume of items that Pandora sells that have diamonds in is very low compared to the rest of their inventory. But yeah, I think we've dealt with that question. do we have any data on the synthetic penetration into the polished market and the end product sales? We have started to track that data. One of the issues actually is that only India for now separates lab grown from natural diamonds in their import classification. So when a product is imported, it has what's called an HS code. It has a certain code that categorizes it as a product. And so India has separated those two out. And so now we over the last year, we've started to see some separate data on lab-grown imports and exports to and from India. The United States does not separate those two products out. And that's something that we would like to see the Census Bureau and Customs implement. That at the moment that polished import number is included in the that includes lab grown and natural diamonds. And a shout out to my friends who taught me that recently. Actually, I won't name names, but they know who they are if they are on the webinar. So thank you for that information. But what we do know is that, and looking at the India data, that it's a small fraction of the imports. It's the lab grown. Lab grown is still a very small fraction of imports. Obviously, a lot of the goods are being manufactured in India, but we feel that in terms of value, the lab grown to the United States is a small fraction of the total. We're also starting, but yeah, and in terms of end product sales, it's a difficult one, because the other aspect and something that people don't emphasize is that there's very little data that comes out of the lab grown market. We're not seeing, the natural diamond industry is quite transparent. We get a lot of information, because a lot of the companies are publicly traded, so a lot of the info that I get is public information, and they have to disclose. But also beyond that, the industry is really improved in terms of its transparency and in terms of giving out information. We don't get that from the lab grown. It's in its infancy. It's a bit of the Wild West. It's not as organized. There have been initiatives to create organizations for the lab grown producers. We don't see much traction in that initiative. Companies like Diamond Foundry take on some leadership position in terms of getting the messaging out, but again, we don't have a list of all producers, for example, and that's a problem. That's a lack of transparency on their part. Okay, the question is, what is the position of the secondary rough market? I'm not sure what's implied by that question, except to say, just to repeat what I said earlier, is that I think that both the polished and the rough dealer markets are realigning, and reassessing their role in the market, and there is a trend towards a more efficient flow of goods from mine to market, and that's going to cut people out. That's going to lead to consolidation in the market. So it may be a good thing, because we want more efficiency in the market. Maybe we want to cut the time that it takes a diamond to work through the system before and get that turnaround flowing. But there may be it may cut people out of the business, and so we do expect some consolidation, or whether that's the dealer market or whether that's the smaller players that can't keep up. We'll have to see, but those are the most vulnerable, I think. I've got 2 compliments, so thank you. I appreciate your feedback. Thank you for the webinars. It's my pleasure. I really enjoy these sessions, and we look forward to doing it on a quarterly basis, as we have been doing for over 2 years now. So, but I appreciate your acknowledgement. We have another 2 questions I'll take, and then we'll call it a day. We saw the trends of new coming stones. We can clearly see there is an increase in manufacturing. How were the sales in the last 6 months compared to the levels of stock? I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. Well, we saw, as I said, we've got at the moment a bottleneck in the supply chain, of rough that's waiting to be manufactured, or polish that's waiting to go through the GIA grading system. And it's not just the GIA, but by the way, it's other labs in India as well. But it's true, we did see we did see an increase in inventory in the first an increase in inventory in the first quarter. Whether right now we're not seeing that inventory is available to be sold, so we've seen a drop in inventory available to be sold. There's, I think, still a lot of goods in the market, in the pipeline, but it's not all available because of that bottleneck. But I think so it's difficult to gauge. It's a difficult question to answer. How are the sales in the past 6 months compared to the levels of stock? I thought, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, the industry came out of COVID in a, I think, fairly healthy situation. That that inventory levels, we managed to reduce inventory levels. And we saw a fairly strong recovery in sales. And so in the April edition of the research report, we looked at the issue of bank financing and liquidity, and we're going to readdress that in the June edition of the Rapaport magazine. I'm working on that article right now. But the consensus among people that I spoke to for that research report was that liquidity improved, or at least the industry's standing within the banking system improved, because we managed to reduce inventory and there were orders. There was invoicing going on, and so that combination was put us what is a net positive for the industry. And so it seems that there was that sort of right balance as we moved out of, through the fourth quarter and the first quarter, between sales and stock. There was that balance, and we weren't at the time worried about an oversupply. As I said earlier, if we have another quarter of high rough sales, that'll be an alarm bell for me. And actually, considering the April sales, we might be heading in that direction. I'm not sure, but we're keeping an eye on the rough market. That if there's that continued spike in rough supply, then what's going to we may. I spoke about goods coming into the market when the GIA releases its goods, and then a shortage of goods when because of the lack of manufacturing now. But at some point if there's been a lot of rough coming into the market, and if we have that on another quarter or throughout the rest of the year for that matter, then we need to worry about 2022, I think. Okay, finally, is the industry ready to do what it takes to demonstrate diamond provenance to consumers who want that today or will want it in the future? Yeah, I think it is, but I think because we've seen a lot of initiatives and we've seen, you know, there are many initiatives to show provenance, and more retailers are taking that message on board. They are part of their sustainability message is to show that their diamond has been responsibly sourced. By the way, that needs to include the environmental aspect now. I think the industry has focused very much on its, you know, making sure it's not that the diamond is conflict free, that it's not hasn't affected human rights, blah blah blah, which are all, of course, very important. But I think that in those provenance programs, we need to see more environmental stuff coming into it. I'm very encouraged by there's an initiative among 9 manufacturers in India who have committed to achieve carbon neutrality in their operations. I think it's by 2030. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But that was announced about a year ago, and that was the first time we've seen that sort of awareness in the manufacturing sector. We see it in the mining, we see it in the retail, but we want to see it more in the manufacturers, because if those provenance claims, it's fine to say which mine it came from, but what happened in between can really enhance that story. So to answer your question, I think that this issue is gaining traction, and if sustainability is the editorial theme of the year, that really means that this provenance issue is a strong theme as well. And so the concern there is that it segments the market, and I know that a lot of smaller dealers and a lot of smaller retailers are concerned that they can't provide that. And that's a real concern, and that's something that I think our industry leadership needs to consider, and or some savvy entrepreneur can help people get involved in that. Maybe I'm giving too many business ideas away here. All right. Okay. All right, so I think that's about it. As I say, you have my details on the screen, and I'd love to hear from you. I appreciate your sitting through the webinar, and look forward to hearing from you. And please God, I'm hoping to see you all in Vegas this year. At the moment, we are planning to go, and it would be really such a treat to reconnect with people. So stay safe, everyone. We thinking of our friends in India. Stay safe there, and God bless everyone. Have a great day.